Hello, and welcome to Everything Explained. Today we're unpacking a question that has shaped the last few years like a hurricane. Why did Vladimir Putin attack Ukraine in 2022? People around the world watched, debated, and tried to understand what pushed a country to invade a neighbor. The short answer isn't simple. It's a mix of security fears, power politics, and a calculation about what the West would do. In this episode, we'll map the main ideas without getting lost in rumors, and we'll try to separate what Moscow has publicly said from what many analysts think is really going on. We'll also look at what the invasion means for borders, alliances, and the idea that nations can choose their own path without consequences. First, Russia has repeatedly framed NATO expansion as a direct threat. Since the Cold War, Moscow has argued that Ukraine joining NATO would place missiles in reach of Moscow's key cities. That is the security grievance they cite. Ukraine's tilt toward the West, especially after 2014, looked to many like a constant tug-of-war for influence between Moscow and Washington. Putin called this a danger to Russia's security, and he warned that the West would not be satisfied until Ukraine was fully under Western control. For him, that wasn't just about Ukraine. It was about the future map of Europe and the idea that great powers should be allowed to shape their own neighborhoods. Inside Russia, Putin's grip on power has depended on a project of strength and stability. After years of stagnation and sanctions, presenting himself as the leader who protected Russians at home and Russians abroad can help justify tough policies. There's also a bargaining game. A war can create a rally around the flag effect that helps him suppress dissent and keep the system from turning inward. Some observers say the invasion was meant to rewrite the domestic social contract, not just to win a battlefield victory. Early on, Moscow seemed to expect a quick, decisive victory that would topple the Ukrainian government and force a capitulation. But Ukraine fought back with courage, and Western countries quickly supplied weapons, intelligence, and sanctions. The result was a protracted war with heavy costs for Russia, including economic pain and a pushback in global opinion. Putin's planners also misread Western unity. They assumed the West would not risk a long, costly confrontation, and they underestimated Ukraine's will to defend its country. Analogy helps here. Picture a bigger kid in a schoolyard who sees a boundary thinning as the smaller kid leans toward the fence. If the boundary stays firm, the older student loses a little control, but a clear line keeps the peace. If the older student pushes, he risks a longer fight and more trouble at home. Putin probably hoped for a swift strike that would intimidate Ukraine into staying in its lane. He miscalculated how tenacious Ukraine could be, how united Western powers would become, and how costly sanctions would be for Russia. The outcome wasn't a clean redraw of the fence. It became a long, costly standoff with no easy exit. That shift matters for the world too. The invasion catalyzed a new era of sanctions and support for Ukraine, including heavy weapons, training, and international legal actions. It also pushed European nations to accelerate energy diversification and reduce dependence on Russian gas. It forced NATO to rethink deterrence, readiness, and how to reassure Eastern members. The global economy felt the shock: energy prices, supply chains, and a broader shift in security thinking. Some observers worry that the damage to trust in international rules could outlast any battlefield victory. Others point to renewed diplomacy and the stubborn fact that borders, once crossed, are harder to restore than they appear. Beyond seizing land, Russia also has economic and symbolic goals: to disrupt Western influence, to claim control over energy routes, and to send a message to other neighbors about what happens when they move toward the West. Taking back Crimea in 2014 gave Moscow a taste for momentum. The 2022 invasion aimed to reset the regional balance. In their view, a weakened Ukraine would prevent Western integration nearby, preserving what they call a favorable security order for Russia. Moscow used a narrative that was hard to verify. Claims of protecting ethnic Russians, preserving civilians, and denying genocide were used to justify coercive action. In reality, the invasion triggered widespread condemnation and a wave of sanctions. The disconnect between the official story and what many observers saw on the ground is a reminder of how powerful language can be in a war. So, why did Putin attack Ukraine in 2022? The short answer is a mix of security fears, prestige, domestic pressure, and miscalculation. The invasion wasn't a single moment but a fuse that burned from years of grievance into a protracted war. The consequences are massive: human suffering, a disrupted European order, and a rethinking of how the world guards borders and rules. The lesson for all of us is clear: Borders exist to protect people, and defending them is how we defend tomorrow.